Well, hello and back again. And I'm going to continue on with the book, which I have currently finished. And just kind of recap from last time. We follow our protagonist, our main character, the name William Johnson. He goes from being this kind of really, arrogant rich boy who gets tricked into a bet for $1,000, which was a lot for the late 1800s. We're talking about 1876, 18 something. And the bet was that rather than going to the west with Professor Marsh, he was going to end up going to Europe and have a good time. And in preparation, he does go over to Dr. Marsh, and he finds out that all the positions are full. He already has his 12 candidates. However, he does need a photographer. And so William Johnson tells us, oh yeah, I'm a photographer, which he isn't, but he goes to an actual photographer for classes on how to take photography. And he does learn. And that's where he starts on his trip. And as they're traveling, they arrive to this town of Cheyenne. And that's where he meets this apparently beautiful girl named Lucienne, who is a performer at it's kind of like a French theme theater that they have. And, well, he walks with the girl for a very brief amount of time at night after she finishes work. By the time he wakes up in the morning, everybody's gone, and he's told as much that his stuff remains there, so it's not like he was left with nothing. However, Professor Marsh and the rest of the team has already left, and he was left alone in the hotel. And apparently, the reason was that they suspect, well, Professor Marsh, he still suspects that being from Pennsylvania, that William Johnson has connections with Professor Cope, who is his rival. And he never gets that off his mind, so he does still believe that he's like a secret spy, and a double agent, if you will. At any rate, we resume with that same morning, where he's been left alone and he doesn't know what to do. Now, it's not that kind of easy what happens next, and you'll see what I mean. So we have William Johnson, who is in the diner, and he is trying to think of what to do next. Of course, he's hungry, but he's also scared that he's left alone in the Old West, and he needs to get back somehow. When he just by chance encounters with Professor Cope. Professor Cope, if you remember from last time, Professor Marsh had described Professor Cope as being kind of sadistic. He took advantage of a disabled woman who Professor Marsh happened to be in love with. And he's overall not a nice guy. That he even killed his own father for the family fortune and all that stuff. However, when William Johnson meets Professor Cope, he notices that he is literally different from Professor Marsh. Whereas Professor Marsh is kind of shorter and kind of more stone-faced and kind of more paranoid. Professor Cope is taller, he's more energetic, he's more jovial, he's more warm, he is happy. And that's kind of like a very big difference. If we recall from what was talked about regarding Professor Cope, he was a child prodigy by the age of 6. He was writing papers. He went to university, and he is very intelligent, highly intelligent. And this is when Professor Cope offers William Johnson a chance to ride with him. However, they're not 12, so it's not like a big group compared to Professor Marsh. they're not riding in style, so it's not like they're going to special accommodations at where they're arriving to. And they are going to kind of weather it out, so they are going to be sleeping outside, and they're going to be having poor food, if you will. And that's fine. I mean, William Johnson says, you know what, that's fine, I'll go along, because Professor Cope would also kind of appreciate one more man into the company, but also a photographer. It's always a good thing to have. Remember, back in those days, the way that photography was also kind of like new, and with how it was being revealed with the chemicals in a dark room and all that, it really was very how could I say it? It's very innovative. And innovative in the sense that the way that people can document their lives, that something actually did happen, was a photography. And photography was no longer, you had powder and all this. There was actually other ways of doing it. And that's kind of where this new technology falls in, and why Professor Marsh was very keen on having a photographer as part of the group. Because you need photography, you need proof of where you dug up the bones, you need proof of where you were, proof that it was you who actually did something. And, well, overall, it also is kind of vanity, because, hey, look at me. See this proof? See this photo? It's incontrovertible truth. And it's something that everybody loved. And not just for professors, it was also for other types of people. I'll get back to that in just a bit. Anyway, so William Johnson does ride with Professor Cope and the whole group. And as they're traveling, he also meets with Professor Cope's wife, who, one, she was not disabled, two, she wasn't being mistreated or anything, and, well, three, she was also very pleasant. He also gets to meet and I believe it's like 2 or 3 more members of the group, one by the nickname of Toad, the other one by the name of Sternberg, and then there was another, which I don't remember his name right now, but it wasn't that big of a group. Now, as they start arriving to different towns, Professor March arrives before them and starts leaving trouble. So they arrive into this one town where Professor Cope gets immediately arrested by the sheriff. And the reason being was that they got the tip that he had murdered his own father and that he was a sadistic murderer, which he isn't. And that was a whole entire thing, where Professor Cope gets kind of angry, and then because he gets fed up to a certain point, he does kind of lose himself, and he does kind of punch and kick the sheriff on the ground, and they're able to leave because it's kind of those type of things. At any rate, where they're traveling is towards the Midwest, I should say. When they arrive to Salt Lake City, they meet Brigham Young, which whoever has heard of him might recognize him as being associated with Mormons, and Joseph Smith and all that good stuff. They're kind of mentioned, but in the sense that because Mormons were kind of persecuted for not being traditional Christians, they when they got Salt Lake City, they made that place their own. And not just that, but they want to know who's arriving and want to have the complete control, so that they are not further prosecuted, although they do kind of prosecute other people because they're not Mormons. At any rate, that's not important. He arrives, he got their blessing, he has the blessing to kind of continue. He heads off. Now, when they arrive to, I believe it was Fort Benton, it's one of the forts around that area where they were very much, and we're talking about in an era where it was the U.S. Army versus the Native Americans. And at one point there was a treaty, but that treaty was broken not by the Native Americans, but by the U.S. Army and men who actually wanted to mine and obtain the resources of the land. And so it caused conflict, and it began this whole narrative of, oh, it's the savages that are going to cut the scope of your head, or that they're going to do this and that, and the savages, savages, the uncivilized, that sort of thing. And that's when they get a guide by the name of Little Wind, who uh, I believe he is from the tribe Little Crow, or Crows. Those were a more kind of friendly tribe with the U.S. Army. And they also had a cook, who is, well, the cook. He also has other nicknames, but that's not important. The fact is that they travel all the way to the territory of Montana. And in Montana, that's where they arrive and they make camp. There's a cliff, and that's where the magic starts happening. Because you see, when they look at the cliff, they are not really sure what they're looking at, except for Professor Cope, and that's where he explains, well, if you look at the different colors, those are the different layers of rock, and that takes time to form. And so, obviously, if this land was here for a long, long time, what's in the lower layers is going to be older. And so, if you look at the middle layers, because it's a pretty large cliff, and you look at anything that's smooth, obviously that's not part of the rock itself. It's most likely bone, and that's how they start figuring out where to dig, how to excavate the bones, how to carefully lower them from the cliff, because they had to climb up and be very careful, very methodical. But also they had to work very diligently in order to retrieve those fossils. Now, this is where we get to the part where I see the connection with the Jurassic Park has, this universe, this world, and that is when they discover teeth. So they spend a little time there. They start obtaining fossils, and then they start moving up, and they actually get on the cliff, and not through like the face, where they were excavating, but they kind of go on the side. And what they find, or what William Johnson finds, is a remarkable discovery, because so far the fossils that they've been retrieving are for animals that are kind of big, kind of like an average animal, maybe like a horse or like a dog, that type of size. Not that those are the animals, but that type of size. And what William Johnson finds, he didn't recognize it at once, but Professor Cope did. And these were these teeth. As Professor Cope called them, they were dragon teeth. Not just that, but he recognized that because of the size of the teeth, it should have belonged to a large animal, a large dinosaur. And they do the calculations, and it's like huge, larger than a house, to the point that every step must have been thunderous. And so he called this a brontosaurus. Well, okay, they continue digging and they continue doing their work up until they start finding issues. And the issues are that Professor Marsh is also there at the location. Now, Professor Marsh and the team actually poisoned a spring where they were getting their water. And that's how they kind of figure out that somebody else was there. And when they went to find out, it was Professor Marsh. There's this kind of bit of play that goes on in which Professor Marsh arrives around dinner time, and they do like this back and forth. Professor Marsh and Professor Cope, they go back and forth. It's compliments, but at the same time they're goading each other in a way. It's kind of odd, I know, but at any rate, what Professor Cope had done was that he left like he fabricated a fossil meaning that he grabbed different bones, he put them together that did not belong together, but that could seemingly belong together, and with the darkness coming in, it wouldn't be that apparent. And that was just so that Professor Marsh could kind of draw his attention to fossils that weren't the fossils that Professor Cope was trying to protect. Because Professor Marsh had not found any fossils, but he wanted to claim fossils that weren't his. So it's that kind of thing. And it's kind of ironic because Professor Marsh had been saying, oh, Professor Cope steals other people's work. Well, that's what Professor Marsh did. At any rate, so not to prolong this too much, what ends up happening is that there is an attack. And so, remembering the times that these are hostile times, the Sioux tribes start moving up to the north to migrate. And according to the book, they're kind of killing anybody they see. And they happen to come upon them. And so while they're trying to take the fossils back, they do have to make like 2 trips back and forth. They take the first half to be shipped over, can't remember, it says that it's kind of like a ramification from the Missouri River. Not really sure, but they go to a port, to a city, they ship it over. Will and Johnson, along with Toad and Littlewind, they go back. Oh, and Cook. They travel back to the camp for the rest of the fossils, but they are attacked by these, the Sioux Indians. There's a bit of confrontation. They barely make it. They were able to retrieve the fossils before being attacked, but when they're kind of on their way back, it's when they get attacked. They end up going over to the south. Toad gets killed. Little Wind gets very gravely injured. He's about to die. He doesn't die right then and there. It does take a couple of days. But William Johnson ends up alone. So what ends up happening, he goes over to the south and reaches this kind of new town called Deadwood. Deadwood is kind of an interesting place. And I'm going to kind of get back to that in a bit. I do want to keep this short. So, what are my thoughts so far? So far, there's a lot of action that is going on. And there is kind of a lot of work that is being done. What I'm getting the sense of is that apart from the fossils being excavated, you wouldn't really tell that this is a Jurassic Park book in a way. I mean, it's not labeled as Jurassic Park, but you wouldn't notice that it's part of the universe. So, as I said, I already finished reading the book, but my concluding thoughts will be in the next video. For now, let's leave it at that. Alright. Take care, and just remember, be kind to those around you. You never know what they're going through. Alright, see you later.